All right, everyone, we start off today talking about the Rage Against the War Machine rally that actually was held yesterday in the United States in D.C. Fairly good attendance. I love seeing some of the propaganda claiming, well, there was only a few hundred people that showed up there, and they were all a bunch of Russian sympathizers. You do realize that people are capable of fact-checking the crowd size by looking at clips other than the very, very carefully close-in shots that are being described by the missing link media that opposes the concept of the anti-war movement. And it is what this is. Now, that means strange bedfellows. So you got Ron Paul up on stage, but you've also got former Dem Tulsi Gabbard. You've got Dennis Kucinich there. You've got the LP's leadership like McArdle. And then you have people who represent left-wing groups too. A link in the description archived, of course, is just one of the stink pieces about this. This comes from the world socialists. The far left, the pro-war far right, the neocons, the neolibs are all completely out to lunch. There are so many different compelling reasons to oppose brinksmanship with Russia at this time. Not even just the ethical ones, the economic ones make sense. War inflation is definitely a thing when you're spending tens of billions of dollars abroad, and you're printing that somewhere, I think. It can become a problem. You do have the ethical question. I would say the strategic question as well is one that needs to be addressed, which is what good is being done. We've tried this kind of strategy before where a third-party state is in some sort of conflict and we back one side or the other. Did it work with the FSA in Syria? No. It prolonged conflict and Assad is still there. Now you've got open Iranian antagonism within the region because they were called on. You also have skirmishes involving Turkey, an important NATO member, by the way, I would point out, with a massive-ass military ground capability. We've had all sorts of problems as the result of that. Look at Iraq, where we also were indirectly intervening, or Iran for that matter, prior for an extended period of time. What ended up happening? Despite Saddam supposedly almost getting the bomb, we march in, upend things, Saddam goes, but are things stable and wealthy and people are well off in Iraq? No. What about in Libya, where we were supporting groups there, Benghazi? No, Libya has been crushed. There are parts of the country were beginning to gain almost developed status. Now it's sub-third world, like most desperately impoverished you can possibly have. Basically look in Afghanistan. After 20 years, we decide to leave. Things collapse immediately. They're right back to square one, having left a bunch of toys and goodies for the next generation of mujahideen. We also had an influence there before we actually launched a war. It was more like the situation in Ukraine. In Vietnam, we didn't start off by invading Vietnam to nullify them commie advances. No, long before that, we had advisory forces there to train people. We were sending weapons and aid and money and so forth, and trying to do the diplomacy thing. Somehow, the Ukraine situation is worse now. As of the other day, with Kamala Harris officiating the fact that the United States deemed that Russia had committed war crimes in Ukraine, the door to diplomacy has been effectively slammed shut. At this point, I think that what they're hoping to do is to do to Russia what was done to the United States in multiple recent engagements, which is that by beefing up the Ukrainians, the Russians can't win. They can hold territory. They can have air superiority to some basis, but they can't ever win because they can't ever exhaust the firepower and the manpower. Although I would note that NATO is openly admitting now, hey, we're running low on our ammo stores. We're going to need to crank out some more mortar shells and shit. Well, I guess if you want less unemployment, those factories getting expanded are temporarily useful. Almost there's an economic side to it. Well, all of the arms dealers that happen to donate heavily to political campaigns. Who would have thunk that would ever happen, by the way? It's never happened before in U.S. or human history. I would like to point this out with regards to the COPE, pretending that the rally only had 300-400 people at it. That is a lie. Pretending that everyone there is waving Russian flags. Yes, there were pro-Russian groups that amassed there, because it's against specifically the U.S. involvement with the war in Ukraine. Most of the people there were LP members and sympathizers. some leftist groups like hippies and shit with the rainbow flags that simply refuse to cuck and do like the NPR liberals have done and say, well, this war is different. I'd also like to point out one other thing. All the time, anytime a proxy conflict like this drags on and on, more and more people get off the, hey, we should keep doing this thing. Economic turn, slowdown, hey, maybe we shouldn't send this lethal aid, this money. The mass casualty event, terrorist incident gets spawned. It chips away at this. Like with the invasion of Iraq, the invasion of Afghanistan, the early influence over Vietnam, the list goes on and on. Anti-war movements never start off particularly popular, unless war exhaustion is already high and there's some sort of compelling reason. Most often it's a vocal minority of people like this, or like myself, that oppose continued action in part or in whole, and say, maybe we should attempt diplomacy this time. I know it doesn't make as much money for your shareholders of the people in Congress, but it is the right thing to do. And then you get a wall of propaganda saying, no, if you don't wholeheartedly and full-throatedly support killing a bunch of people, then that means that you like the other dude. So you like Putin, and strangely they tie up Z in here, even though some of the people complaining are leftoids. So I don't know exactly what they're smoking. It must be stronger than yesteryear's hippie weed. This is sellout. They're on fentanyl now, I suppose. You get the propaganda, but over time it begins to wear off in effectiveness. And more people say, well, I was never really for it to begin with. At 5 years from now, a lot of the people that right now have the Ukrainian flag in their bio, they won't anymore. This is slightly different from the Iraq War, though, because in the early throes of that, when it was more popular, social media was still pretty new. There wasn't a whole lot going on then. Back in 2003, YouTube is brand new, and you've got, the dawn of social media like Facebook thereafter. You don't have the kind of interconnectedness, and certainly the archival capabilities that you have currently. So a lot of these people that are putting these messages out there, they'll be compelled to double down and simply withdraw into their pro-war echo chamber. I would note that they're all Chickenhawks. I don't see them going over to volunteer. They were told by Zelensky they could. For some reason, they don't want to go over there and eat Ukrainian MREs and get fired at by Russian special forces. I wonder why that could be. And by the way, a lot of these morons also don't support gun rights in the United States. Well, we need to do more about civilian gun ownership in the United States, because Americans can't be trusted with, a pea shooter. We're very dangerous and despicable people. But we should take a bunch of weapons of actual war and we should send them overseas into a conflict that doesn't directly involve us because it's not a NATO country. And I like the hyperbolic horseshit. Well, Russia will invade all of Europe if he's allowed to advance further in Ukraine. The existence of Europe itself, mostly NATO members there, is hazarded by Russia doing this. Where were you people gung-ho for fighting back when Russia did this in Crimea during the Obama years? There was no red flag there? Nobody seemed to belly up to the bar and encourage that there be some sort of solution there. They were all too busy ass covering for Obama because they had begun to sell out. So I support the anti-war movement. Doesn't mean I support Russia, although that is one of the propaganda talking points. And 5 or 6 years from now, and the conflict is probably still ongoing, in stalemate mode with hundreds of thousands more civilians dead, Ukraine's economy in ashes, and the U.S. still propping it up, a lot of these people will begin to see the light. And all of a sudden they'll say, I never really supported it to begin with. That is what will happen in this particular juncture. That's about all. Peace out.